first came to Cuba, cell phones weren't invented. And I was in my early 20s. And I've been coming back for 5 decades. Making friends with everybody. Trying to tell the story of Cuba.
Oh, it's a home run for Fidel!
In the early 70s, there was a revolution going on. So we took our cameras down to Cuba. Our equipment's so heavy, we had to put it in a baby carriage. All of a sudden, we noticed Fidel began watching us, and because of his curiosity, we wound up with our first interview.
Yeah, here we go.
Good morning.
Fidel was 53 when we flew to New York together, and he always remembered me, and he was always excited to see me.
Ah, viniste, ¿no?
What would you do if you were mayor of New York City, Fidel?
Era renunciar.
The first thing I would do was to resign.
So all this stuff going on in Cuba. When I filmed here in 1975, all these shelves were full. What's happening to Cuba? Uh-oh.
Is everything okay?
We've got interfered here. I learned many things with you, and I'll see you next time I come back to Cuba, okay?
Okay.
Because so much has changed in the past 2 years. Selfies, they never had selfies.
I'm back to see my friends one more time.
Will there?
Jon.
I'm John.
This is to our happy reunion after 16 years.
Hey!
Nice to see you, Fidel.
You look great.
How you doing?
Bien.
Whoa, still strong. Came here young, idealistic, and I grew to love Cuba. Last time we had a contest.
Let's see who's stronger now.
I haven't won a match in 40 years. Sorry.
Also, one of the founders of DCTV, an institution really that's been around for some time, right?
Yeah. Anybody here been to DCTV?
You should.
Oh, come on, guys.
I have.
So 70,000 people have taken classes at DCTV. Right now, we've got hundreds of high school kids taking classes. If you're an independent filmmaker, you want to get equipment, you want to learn how to do things that even I don't know how to do, we're the place.
It's an incredible resource in this city, truly an institution founded
And
by
nearby, it's a landmark firehouse. You guys can walk there.
Down in Tribeca, right? Like just or like
Yeah,
a round trip. Yeah.
just below Canal Street. Yeah. Built on a swamp. So come before we sink into the swamp.
John, talk to me about Cuba and the Cameraman. You have been traveling to Cuba for decades upon decades now, since you were a young man, right?
Yeah, you know, there's even pictures of me here as a young man, me talking to Fidel. We were both young at one point. So I started in 1972 was the first trip to Cuba.
What made you go then?
So
Outside of the fact that it was just after a revolution.
So I've been living here in this neighborhood for many, many years, and back in the early 70s, we were fighting for better schools, we were fighting for better health care, we were fighting for better jobs, and spectacularly unsuccessful. Fighting against the Vietnam War. And down in Cuba, they were implementing a lot of these social programs that we were only dreaming about having here in the United States. And so I wanted to see for myself, because there were people coming back from Cuba also that had bad things to say about Cuba, and regular Americans couldn't go. But as a reporter, I could go. And I got on a boat. This crazy guy had a ship. He had some type of trust fund, and he declared himself a world citizen. He printed his own passport in Esperanto, flew a rainbow flag from the boat, and was bringing children's drawings and musical instruments in defiance of the blockade. Said, the Cubans are waiting for me, and when we got there, they boat arrested us, and they wouldn't even let us off the boat. So that was my first trip to Cuba.
And what brought you? What kept you going back?
Well, there's nothing that gets a filmmaker or a reporter or a curious New Yorker excited than being told that they can't see something. You know, that door shuts in your face, you know, and we're kicking it open. And I did complain so much that they did show up with, you know, remember those great Cadillacs with the big fins? These 2 Cadillac convertibles, the type of cars that I only dreamed about as a kid. They showed up with 2 of those, took us on a 3-hour tour that really whetted my appetite, and then kicked us out of the country. And so I said, I got to get back, because I wanted to see what they didn't want me to see and what we couldn't see as normal Americans.
They were always leaving you wanting more, right?
And they did a really good job. So I began to wonder, how am I going to break through this barricade? And I figured, what do I have in common with the Cubans? The only thing I could think of was baseball. And I liked playing baseball. We played every day when I was a kid, so I formed a team of all my buddies from the neighborhood, and we challenged the Cuban diplomats to play us in Central Park. And they beat us every single Sunday for 2 years. So it was humiliating from a competitive point of view, but from diplomatic point of view, it was kind of good that we didn't let them beat us, but they enjoyed playing us, and they liked me.
So did you end up taking the baseball team back to Cuba? Or to Cuba with you?
No, but when we kept petitioning to be able to go as filmmakers, and so eventually they advocated on our behalf and said, if you're going to let any Americans in to see what's going on in Cuba, let John, they called me Juanito de Barrio Chino, Johnny from Chinatown, let him come.
And now we have this picture here of you and Fidel. In the film, you know, Fidel knows you. He recognizes you when he sees you. What was it like shooting with Fidel and sort of having a relationship with him?
So I had a very unusual relationship with Fidel because basically any question that I asked him, anything I wanted to see, he said, sure, why not? He initiated the relationship. In the early days, all you guys are too young to remember, but the video equipment was really big and heavy. Altogether, it weighed about 90 pounds. And we needed some way to carry this, and so we put it in a baby carriage that I bought over on Avenue B, and we would wheel this thing around. And so Fidel looks up one day, and he sees 3 weirdos chasing after him with a baby carriage, and he came trotting right over to wonder what was going on, and so he initiated the conversation. I think over the next couple of years, he became aware of our community programs, in which we were using video to try to change our community and make it better. I think he thought that was pretty interesting. And also, any place in the world, there was a fire in those days, in Central America, over in Cambodia, in the killing fields, my camera was there first. And I think he respected that. And so when I asked him, hey, Fidel, you coming to New York? Can I come with you? He said, sure. So he didn't let anybody else follow him. And I spent 3 days with him. And if you want to know what Fidel's like behind the scenes, watch the movie on Netflix, because you're going to find out a lot about him.
Right, and the movie premieres this on the 24th,
the day after
right?
Thanksgiving.
Day after
right.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It premieres on Netflix. It's also, if you're in the city, it's playing at the IFC Center, right?
Right, 3 times a day, and I'll be there, and I got free tickets, and so like if you see me lurking around in front of the theater, just come over to me.
But after that gracious plug that I just gave, give me a little tidbit of what Fidel was like behind the scenes hanging out with you.
So, you know, I had always heard that Fidel wore a bulletproof vest everywhere he went, even supposedly to sleep. When I saw Fidel and I observed him go to the bathroom, he had to take like 5 security guys with him, and I just wondered what that was like, and what's it like carrying that? And he says, what bulletproof vest? And you'll see in the film, he strips down for me and shows me that he doesn't wear a bulletproof vest, and when I asked to see where he eats, where he sleeps, you'll get a tour of Fidel's bedroom.
Now, because Cuba, you know, it's, for the most part kind of still is, but really was a country run by a communist regime, specifically Fidel, following the revolution, they were demonized by the West, especially our country. What was it like going there and seeing what Cuba was really like, and how did that make you feel about what the information that you were being given, not just by our government, but by American media, and how they depicted Cuba as well?
So when I went there, I was very excited. And I thought, wow, a country where everybody cares more about other people than about themselves, where people aren't selfish, where we want to build schools and houses. And I was really excited.
Theoretical communist society.
The theoretical communist society. And you know, I don't think that the Cuban government really trusted us. And so they isolated us in a very rural area without any transportation. We had transportation and a guy named Freddie Torres, who was in charge of us. We had a bus, gas, a driver, and Freddie hijacked this bus because in Cuba, very few people had that type of luxury, and used it to impress all his girlfriends. And so he disappeared, and sequentially, he had a lot of girlfriends, and he visited all his girlfriends while every single day we're sitting at the camp. And I'm
the route? Yeah.
And no, we were left waiting for him in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And we were told, don't you dare leave this camp unless Freddie's with you as your babysitter. And I had negotiated a list of 200 things that I wanted to film. And had the promise that we couldn't film any of these things because Freddie never came. And so after 4 days of this, I said, you know what? Bye, Freddie. I'm going to walk down the road and I'm going to talk to whomever I meet. And they said, you can't do this. You can't break the rules. They're going to. I said, kick me out, okay? And we went down the road. I couldn't speak any Spanish. And I hear clunk. I wonder if we have a picture of it, clunk. And so at the edge of the road was this peasant and his team of oxen. They farm in Cuba the way we farmed here in the United States 200 years ago with this primitive technology. And he became my best friend, and I followed him and his brothers for 45 years.
That's unbelievable. And what was it like watching his life over the course of 45 years, him age while at the same time Cuba change, especially in the last 10 years? Cuba has gone through drastic changes.
So initially, the Cuban peasants were interesting because they were a little bit beneath the surface of things that affected other people. They were self-sufficient, and so they had their own food. When food might be scarce for other people, they always had food. But the United States did one thing. We wanted to destroy the Cuban economy. And in 1977, the Cuban economy was at an all-time high. Fidel had bet everything on the sugar price. Sugar prices were sky high. They had so much money in the country. They were building schools, building hospitals, and the leaders were driving around in green Alfa Romeo convertibles. Can you imagine a revolution like this where you get an Alfa Romeo? And they called it the alpha mentality in sort of a derisive way because they just were really cocky and very full of themselves. And the United States says, well, we can fix this. And we dumped our sugar reserves on the international market. We crashed the sugar price and destroyed the basis of their economy. And then a few years later, the Soviet Union collapsed. They were subsidizing the Cubans $8 million a day. The Cuban economy contracted 85% in moments. So you can imagine if you lose 85% of your income, it was horrible. And the country was literally dark, very, very little food. And this was the first thing that affected the peasants because the people from the city would come out in the nighttime starving and killed sequentially all their animals until they wiped out every means of production that these three old men have. And it's the saddest moment in the film. I defy you to look at this and not cry like I cried when I met them that time. It was a terrible period in Cuba, and the people suffered. And the economy has never recovered from that period. It's much better than it was. And it's astonishing that the peasants have rebuilt their lives, and I don't want to give away how they did it. You'll see it in the movie. And that's one of the things that's really unique about the Cuban people. Their survival skills and their ability to be sort of happy despite things that we New Yorkers wouldn't accept for a minute is very refreshing, and it's why so many people love to go down and visit Cuba. Any of you guys ever visited Cuba? Okay, well, you better hurry up because we have a president now who's interested in turning the clock back and making it harder for Americans again to go to Cuba.
Well, yeah. Well, can I ask your opinion about that? Why is he interested in that outside of? I mean, if it's just ruining Obama's legacy, that's insane. Like, what is there any legitimate reason to roll it back?
Well, if he's interested in bringing about regime change, it's been spectacularly unsuccessful as a policy. If you came in here every single day and sat down and smiled at the cameras and the cameras never worked, and you came in the next day and the next day and the next, and you're trying to make a TV show, would you do this every single day for 50 years? Right. It didn't work. The thing that did work was openness. When Americans went down to Cuba and engaged in direct contact with the Cubans, things began to really, really change. The openness of the society increased. People's unhappiness with the government increased, which was one of the desires of...
People's unhappiness with the government increased.
Sure,
yeah.
Because their relatives would come back from Florida. They had nice clothes. They showed them pictures of cars. Maybe it was a picture of the neighbor's car, but they were showing them pictures of nice cars. And it created... desires. This is a really interesting part of the film. The Mariel Bay boat lift occurred when a group of Cubans jumped over the walls of an embassy and demanded to be able to leave the country. And they were joined by more and by more people. And Jimmy Carter said, all these people are freedom fighters. We welcome you into the United States. And Fidel thought about this and he goes, okay, it's time to get rid of all the people who don't like me. and said, bring boats. Anybody from the United States who brings a boat, Uncle Jose's going on the boat, Aunt Matilda's going on, just bring the boats. And it was incredible. Shrimp boats, tugboats, if the rowboats would make it. I mean, this harbor was full of boats. And what Fidel did is he also emptied the prisons and emptied the mental hospitals. You've all seen Scarface, okay? So he's a Mariolito. He took the worst of the worst and mixed them in with grandmas and uncles and stuff like that and shipped them to the United States. And Jimmy Carter had no idea this was going on until my report about this was broadcast on TV, and 15 minutes after the broadcast, Jimmy Carter comes on, oh my gosh, and stopped the boat lift.
Now, speaking of broadcast on television, there's a it's in your Wikipedia, but there's a piece of your career that I'm interested in. Just this weekend, the New York Times released this report on civilian casualties in Iraq, basically, and how they've been wildly underreported, which we can kind of always assume, really, when it comes to war in other countries, be Iraq, Afghanistan, or Yemen. But in 1991, you had a situation where you actually had footage about civilian casualties in the first Gulf War, right? And you were let go. You were fired from NBC, I think it was, and then later it was supposed to air on CBS, and the people who wanted to air it on CBS were fired. Is that true?
So, unfortunately, that's sadly true. We had to defy the Iraqi restrictions. When we got to Iraq in the middle of the war, it was obvious that this was not the bloodless war that was being shown to us on American television. Back in those days, the generals would go on TV and they would show the cameras from the jet planes hitting bridges, and one of the reporters asked if there were any planes that missed the target. 100% accuracy. And they also asked them about civilian deaths and collateral damage. And our military claimed that this was a bloodless war. And I don't know whether you guys have been to wars, but I've been to a lot of wars, and there's no such thing. And it's very, very important that the American people understand what happens when we apply our military power around the world. We have to know this, because we're a big, strong, and potentially dangerous nation. And so, in the middle of the war, I went to Iraq. And when you arrive in Iraq, you're presented with 3 pages of restrictions that you're supposed to follow. Can't turn your camera on without permission, can't turn it off without permission, I mean, it just went on and on. And instead of this single babysitter, we got 2 or 3 babysitters because they were really scared of me, because they knew that I had had a lot of experience in war zones and I might trick them, and trick them we did. And within 2 or 3 days, we broke every single one of those restrictions. We filmed what was really going on. It was a war, and people were dying. And I snuck those tapes out of the country in my sock and brought them back to the United States. And NBC was very excited. And this was going to be the lead story on NBC News, and it was going to be the first real truth from the battlefield. And 2 hours before the broadcast, I was summoned into the office of the NBC president, and he said, we're not going to show your tape, and you're never going to work here again, and fired me. And then I went to CBS. CBS watched this material and said, this is astonishing. People need to know about this. We're going to broadcast this. Thank you for bringing this to us. 2 o'clock in the morning, he got a phone call. He was fired. And everybody in television knew that you better not go near this footage. So we don't kill people in the United States like they do in other countries. But
has anyone seen this footage? Has this footage ever come out anywhere?
It was a big deal in Europe and in other places, not here in the United States, the one country that really needed to see this because we were the ones who were prosecuting the war. And it was shown on PBS. Bill Moyer showed it in sort of as a hand-wringing expose of how the American press let us down during that war.
Yeah. So what is it? So my question to you is, just this weekend we see that civilian casualties are wildly underreported in this area, that you were reporting on this in the first Gulf War. What is it like to see history repeat itself? Or is it just not surprising at all, and it's just kind of the way that it is?
I think there's a constant battle between government in every country and the press. They have a job to do, and they assert what they want, and it's our job as reporters to try and show what we think the truth is. It's dangerous now in this country, though, because there's been an incessant campaign to demonize, to trivialize, and to misrepresent the press. And I think this is really important because we risk our lives for you guys. We go out there and we try to show you what's happening so that you guys can make intelligent decisions. And we got people who are making it very, very dangerous and hard for us in a way that I think is not American.
What's so interesting about that, and I couldn't agree with you more, is that the story that you tell of both NBC and CBS essentially firing you and pulling back this footage and it never really airing in American press is this strange example of the press sort of kowtowing to what the government wants, which helps the argument that our current administration makes about the press being fake or the mainstream news being this or that. And obviously they're just sort of exploiting an argument. But years and years of establishment reporting, or establishment press not reporting, has sort of led us to this moment where that exploitative argument can filter through and work.
Well, I've seen a lot of insufficient reporting. I've seen a lot of people who are posers, and I think that makes some other reporters vulnerable to attack, but I've seen a lot of extremely brave and honest reporters who deserve to not be attacked, but to be honored for the work that they do. It's really important.
Let's get some questions from the audience, right here.
Hello. For the reporters who are trying to be honest and be brave like you have, bringing back those tapes, but then when politics of corporations get involved and then people like you actually get villainized for doing something and showing the truth, would you have gone back and redone it differently and played the politics, or would you have done it all over again and risked your career?
Well, you know, I was criticizing our policy of the blockade and doing the same dumb thing over and over again, but I think I would have done the same thing over again. I'm certain of it. And just to show you, I was blacklisted from public television. So, I mean, I sort of have a history of doing this. I would rather have a different history. I don't like picking my teeth off the floor, but I'm not going to back down from this. I've made certain compromises, not in terms of truth, but in terms of sort of artistic editing. I worked for years with Sheila Evans at HBO, who is an extraordinarily strong executive producer.
You produced the documentary about the Fighter brothers, right?
That's correct.
Excuse me for forgetting their name right now, but Life in Lowell.
Right, High on Crack Street.
Yeah, thank you.
So we've had legendary battles, but the films were not untruthful. It was just a disagreement in the way in which it was presented. I feel that my way would have been better, but you know, we do have to make compromises when we're working with these big corporations. I think there are honorable compromises and there are dishonorable compromises. I don't think we've made any dishonorable ones.
Next question.
Hi, how are you?
Where do you guys come from? This is really cool.
Like around.
That's great.
You know. I was wondering if you could describe Cuba in 3 words, what would they be?
In how many words?
3.
3. You should go. Okay? Go and see for yourself. I think that you can get around the current restrictions. Call up JetBlue. There's a way of getting the sort of proper license and visa at the airport when you arrive in Havana. So the round-trip tickets to Cuba, they're like $300. I mean, and you can stay in somebody's house in Cuba, like an Airbnb for $30 a night. Very, very nice, comfortable accommodations. Get to know Cuban families and experience this for yourself. I mean, I want you to watch our film on Netflix, but I don't necessarily want you to only take my word, and I think this is an opportunity for you to go see for yourselves.
Next question, right here.
Hi. So this is actually kind of piggybacking off of what she was saying. What's one thing that you kind of learned about humanity or the human condition from the Cuban people having so much experience there with them?
So I believe that there are good people and bad people in every country. I think maybe the most important lesson I learned was when Freddie Torres took our car and didn't come back. And it was a wet shower for me. But it's good that I took it because it made me more skeptical. It made me into a better reporter. And not to mix my metaphors, but I put the Kool-Aid down and then drank the real drink that the Cubans were drinking every day.
Jon, it's been a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for coming and all the great work that you've done over the years that you've been working, all the important work, all the entertaining work. Cuba and the Cameraman is on Netflix, premieres on Netflix this Friday, right? Everybody go watch it, then go to Cuba.
And come to DC TV. We're 87 Lafayette Street. Our doors are always open. If you want to learn how to make films, if you want to watch films, we welcome you.
It's an amazing resource in this city. Jon Alpert, everybody, give him a round of applause.